Hi, this is Earl Hall from The Earl Hall Show, and you're listening to GrokTALK. GrokTALk.
Welcome back to GrokTALK. My name's Steve McDonald. I'm here with Skip Murphy and Susan Olson, live streaming, finally, from the CNHT studios in Concord, New Hampshire at 8 North Main Street, New Hampshire's most well-armed podcast. And we are back for our next segment with our next guest. You're on mic 4. I got to remember that because you're sitting over there. We are very, very fortunate to have with us Michael Bolden from the 10th Amendment Center. Michael, welcome to the show.
You got the wrong Michael.
I got the wrong Michael? Which Michael do I have?
Michael Meharry.
Hi, Michael Meharry. How are you?
I'm good.
I'm happy to have you here. Sorry.
It's confusing. There's two Michaels, and we're really kind of interchangeable. So.
Well, you know, and then, of course, Mike Rogers was the one who was sending the email around, so I had mics everywhere.
Oh, we're talking on mics, right?
Right.
Yeah, and Mike's holding, too.
And Mike's on hold, yeah. All right, so welcome to the program.
Mike. Sorry.
I'm going to start turning people off so I can actually talk and you can hear me. All right, so 10th Amendment Center. Let's start out with what you guys, just let our listeners know real quick what you guys do and some of the most important things that you're involved in right now.
Well, we're an organization, our national office is based out of L.A., and essentially we do a little bit of activism and a little bit of think tank stuff. So it's kind of a hybrid political activist organization and think tank. And our focus is on constitutional issues. And we like to sum up our core philosophy with one sentence: follow the Constitution, every issue, every time, no exception, no excuses. And really what that means, it means that we are pushing for a decentralized system. That's what the founders intended. They intended most power to be left with the states and the people. They intended very little power to be exercised over everybody from Washington, D.C., and sadly, we've flipped that model on its head, and we've made Washington, D.C. the mecca of all things. And so we're working to try to push back and restore that proper balance of power that was intended from the very beginning and decentralize.
So what have you got? I know you guys have been really, really busy lately. What's big in the world of nullification? Because there's a lot of bills. We have a couple in New Hampshire that we've been talking about, which we can get to later. But what's really hot on your plate right now?
Well, it's really amazing. We were just discussing yesterday. Right now, that we know of, we're tracking 67 nullification bills across the United States, which is absolutely amazing. And I'm sure there's some out there that we're not aware of because it's really hard to keep up with bills in 50 different states. But 67, and dealing with a lot of different issues. I think probably the hot button issue and the one that's gotten the most media attention nationally is our work to deal with the NSA spying at the state and local level. We've got actually a coalition called the Off Now Coalition, and people can learn about that over at offnow.org, and working with a variety of different groups to create a state and local pushback against unconstitutional NSA spying. We've got 12 states now that have introduced some form of legislation that either denies completely any state cooperation with the NSA, or there's a couple of states, including New Hampshire, that are considering bills that deal with one part of our coalition plan, and that's disallowing data shared from the NSA that's gathered unconstitutionally, disallowing that from being used in court. So basically the privacy and data issues. And there's two bills in New Hampshire, HB 1533 and HB 1619, that work together to basically ensure the privacy of people's data there in the state of New Hampshire and ensure that the feds aren't gobbling it up and then sharing it with state and local law enforcement. So that's probably the biggie. We're also doing a lot of work with nullifying Obamacare at the state level, Second Amendment issues, drones, and, of course, marijuana. Those are probably the biggies.
Michael, this is Skip Murphy, and thanks for coming on the show. Philosophically, do you see this as a reaction against the big government of the federal government overstepping its bounds, overreaching into the states, and more than a few people saying enough's enough? Are we starting to see once again, and I know Mike Rogers has some more follow-up questions on this whole topic, of it's time to start slimming down that government, and even at the local level, the state level, are you seeing an upswelling of people saying it's time to wrap government up into a burlap bag and bathtub it?
I think we really are, and for a long time, a lot of the issues that we were dealing with were partisan. So you had reaction against this administration or that administration. With particularly the violations of civil liberties that we've seen over the last couple of years, the NDAA detention that the federal government has suddenly decided is perfectly okay to do in the United States, the overreaching NSA spying and the revelations that Snowden and Greenwald and that bunch has brought to us, that is bringing people together from both sides of the political spectrum, from every side of the political spectrum, to say, you know what, this thing is out of control. It's not just a partisan thing. It's not just we don't like this particular program, but we've got a federal government that is way too big and exercising way too much power. And we're actually seeing people begin to be willing to work across the political spectrum, to set aside the philosophical disagreements they may have on other issues and work together to stop these things. So I really do think that there's a growing awareness that there's simply too much centralized power in Washington, D.C., and that trickles down. It trickles down to the state and local level, too. And hopefully, as this continues to grow, we'll see more and more people desiring to have more control over their own lives and less controlled by these centralized power sources, particularly in Washington, D.C. I mean, who wants a monopoly? You know, we talk about economic monopolies, and if somebody came along and said, we're going to have one grocery store that's going to supply all the groceries in the United States, well, everybody would completely, their heads would blow up, because nobody wants that. They would recognize that there's price increases involved in that, and that there's a less selection of goods, and you're going to get horrible customer service. Well, that's what we've done with government. We've centralized it and made a monopoly in Washington, D.C., and there's still some people, unfortunately, that think that's a good idea, but there's a growing awareness that monopoly is not good in the corporate world. It's not good in the government world either.
Well, Michael, this is Susan Olson, and nice to speak with you. But if there's just this one grocery store, would people mind so much if they didn't have to pay for the groceries that they were allocated?
Well, maybe not. But of course, we all know that wouldn't work. The grocery store would go out of business, and then the whole thing would collapse. And that's really what we're looking at with the federal government in the, I think, not too long term. It's spending money that doesn't exist. It's allocating resources it doesn't have. And so the system is really untenable. And that's, I think, a lot of the desperation on some people who have always been aware of the problem with centralized authority. It doesn't work, especially when you're trying to distribute wealth that doesn't exist. So I think that people recognize that, and people are starting to push back against it.
Okay, Michael, we're going to bring Mike Rogers on. He's on the other line. Mike, you there?
Yes, I am, and it's interesting, especially after Bill O'Brien's comment about streetlight Republicans too. If everything is decentralized, it works a whole lot better. People in one town can choose to have expensive government services, and in the next town can choose to have very few, or in one state versus the next state. These old laboratories of democracy. Whereas, what we're seeing right now, as Mike Mahari says, is that the whole thing is becoming unaffordable and in danger of collapse. And also, the people are beginning to feel the suffocation. It takes a long while before the federal government metastasizes to the point where the people actually realize that the country's got cancer. But we're awfully close to it, and I think that's what's helping to empower and drive this. Maybe you guys are the right folks in the right place at the right time. My mind boggles at the thought that L.A. is the hotbed of the nullification movement, but so it be. And maybe it's just that you're that much better than people that went before you, because you are indeed incredible activists, and you've got more leverage than anybody could possibly hope for. More power to you.
Well, I appreciate that. That's funny. I actually am in Lexington, Kentucky, so we're a decentralized organization as well. But our Bolden lives in L.A., and that's where our national office is. But people often tease him about that, about being in L.A. and the progressive hotbed that it is, and he always jokes that he says, "Well, I like my tyranny warm." So he wants the warm weather if he's going to have to. My desire is to go to Florida, which it's got its own political issues too, but it's warm. I don't like being cold. But I think you're right. I think we are at the right place in the right time, and this organization has existed since 2006. And I remember even when I started about 4 years ago, we were just talking about doing resolutions and 10th Amendment resolutions and, declaring the sovereignty of the states and whatnot that really had no teeth. And like I said earlier, today we've got 67 bills that in some way push back against federal power. And we've found a legal doctrine that's helping us message and getting away from the supremacy clause business and the anti-commandeering doctrine, and that's really helped stave off some of the challenges from lawyers and so-called legal experts that we've had to deal with over the years. So now people are having to make the choice. Do you want these big government programs or not? If you don't, let's attack them from the state level. If you do, then that shows who you are.
Mike, this is Skip again. You brought up an interesting word. We're all techies here, or pretty much. And, Susan's giving me a wry face. But, since she used to consult on building power plants, she gets the whole decentralization effort. And I really look at, you look at technology and everything's going to the Internet of Things, where you're pushing the power and the computation capability out further and further and further from what I started off with, which was the massive big data centers where only the high priests were there. Do you think that the 10th Amendment center's success is because people's the culture is going somewhat to be decentralized given the technology? And, I kept saying, and one other thing for you to comment on is during the slim down, people were so afraid of a government shutdown. And I kept thinking to myself, so what if one shuts down? We got 50 more to work with.
I think that's an interesting analogy, and I've never really thought of it in terms of technology, but I do think that it accounts for a lot of the support at the grassroots level that we're seeing from young people, particularly your late teens and into their 20s, because they are so much more engaged in the technical world, and they see that, one of the guys that I was talking to not long ago was talking about, and I'll admit up front, I'm not a techie person. This stuff all goes way over my head, but I kind of got what he was talking about. He was talking about how they do decentralization within these computer networks to prevent damage if one node is attacked or compromised in some way. They decentralize it so it doesn't destroy the whole system. And that makes complete sense to me, and it makes sense to me within a government context. And it goes to what Mr. Rogers said earlier. You have 50 centers of government instead of one. Well, if one falls, then you've got 49 more to take the place. And if we can decentralize farther to the state or to the local and county level, then here in Kentucky we've got 120 different counties, 120 different localities that can do their own thing. And if one has a problem, then you've got 119 more. So this idea of decentralization, I think young people really grasp it, and this makes me happy because it's good to see young people becoming politically engaged and desiring to fight back against a system that, quite frankly, has screwed them over pretty bad.
Absolutely, and Skip was being incredibly generous when he was saying I was sort of a techie. I am not, but I am a student of language and grammar, and I haven't done the research. Now I'm going to go home and do it because squirrels have appeared. The term Congress, and it's now referenced with a capital C. But if you go back and you look at our founding documents, you find that the federal government was a creation of these several states meeting in Congress with a small c. So they were meeting together, where the in Congress part of it meant the meeting together, and now it's this great big capital C pronoun, and we've forgotten that Congress is not an entity, but Congress should be the several states meeting together, each with their own voice and their own presence.
Michael, hang on to your answer. We're going to go for a 60-second break. We'll be right back.
This is a coalition of New Hampshire taxpayers. We're located at 8 North Main in Concord, New Hampshire. This is the repository for all things conservative and municipal. So if you have a problem in your town, your school, your budget committee, the right to know law, and now at the top of our list is voter fraud. You have a tip for us, some information for us, you want to join or help us out, cnht.org.
Hi, this is Rich Gerard, host of Gerard at Large in the Morning. The the Manchester area's only locally owned, locally operated, focused, and interested riveting radio show, heard live every Monday through Friday from 6 to 9 on 90.7 FM WLMW, New Hampshire Family Radio, and available 24/7 live or archived at GerardAtLarge.com. Be sure to tune in.
GrokTALK.
All right, we're back. I'm going to bring Michael back up. And did you want to reiterate your question, Susan?
I did. I'm wondering, what's the value of doing the etymology of Congress? Because ostensibly the Congress was a derivation of sovereign states meeting together and trying to find that Venn diagram of the things that they could not do themselves but sought to do jointly. And it's just kind of grown out of control.
It's interesting as we talk all of the different ways that you can come at these various structural, I don't want to say arguments, but realities in our system, and that's incredibly interesting to me. The meaning of the word and looking at that. Now, history is my wheelhouse, and I've studied in depth the ratification era and the constitutional drafting era, and you're exactly right. I mean, if you go back, the colonies were independent. They were sovereign states. When they declared their independence not as one giant blob, but as 13 independent states, and states actually had the same meaning as nations. They were viewed in the same way as France or Spain. And that basic entity never changed through the various changes in the structural system. Under the Articles of Confederation, they were still considered sovereign states. And during the ratification, they ratified the Constitution as sovereign independent states, sovereign independent political societies. They came together, they agreed to create a central government to do very specific things that are enumerated in Article 1, Section 8 and some other places in the Constitution, and they retained their sovereignty in all the other areas. They never made themselves into one giant blob. That's a myth created by Alexander Hamilton and Joseph Story and Abraham Lincoln and various people throughout history. They always retained that independent sovereignty, only giving up delegated powers. And so from a logical standpoint, the states are still in control. The federal government is a creature of the people of the states. And so therefore the people of the states have the authority and the right to say, this is what we've delegated to you. This is how we define that delegation of power. And in the last instance, we have the right to take that power back. In fact, that's in several of the ratifying documents. So I think the study of that word fits right into what I know about the history of the ratification era. It's pretty cool.
Well, I like to draw the analogy, not just here in New Hampshire, but with the federal government, that they're really nothing more than a drug dealer, and they give you a little taste of this for free, and then you decide you like it so much that you do anything to go back and get some more. And I find it increasingly disturbing that people forget that we can do things on our own, and that we just have got to shake that addiction, and it's going to be hard, but once we're clean of it, we can be in charge of our own lives. It's just really horrible temptation to go back. It's very easy, and all of these free things, all of this free dope that we're getting from the feds in the person of many of them are dopes, in fact, but it's a tough thing to break.
Yeah, I was talking to some folks here in Kentucky, and unfortunately my state has run headlong, full force, enthusiastically yelling and screaming into the Obamacare world and setting up the state-run exchange. And, it's kind of been set up as, this is the success story here in Kentucky. Nobody mentions the fact that like 60% of the people that have signed up to the exchange have not signed up for actual insurance but have gotten onto the Medicaid rolls. And everybody thinks this is so great right now. The federal government's paying for it. I mean, down the road, just a couple of years, that money starts to go away. That's going to fall on the state of Kentucky, which already has budget problems. But you're right; it's an addict, and they think about the here and the now. I'm going to get this now. This is great. It makes me feel good. Woohoo! And then in 5 years, they wake up and realize that their entire life has been demolished. And so you're right. It's a very, very good analogy, and that's the biggest struggle from our standpoint, is getting state legislators and people to see the big picture and begin to push away all of this federal assistance that's supposed to be so great. That's actually just money that doesn't exist being spent.
You being down in Kentucky reminded me that I hold the commission of colonel on the staff of former Governor John Y. Brown, so I am a Kentucky colonel.
How about that?
How about
My grandfather
that?
is too.
I'm probably father's age. Thank you for reminding me.
I doubt that.
I think Mike Rogers is probably chomping at the bit way over there on the left coast to add to the conversation. Mike?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Now I realize there's so much going on in the room, and it's fascinating anyway.
You would be amazed to see all the buttons I'm having to slide around to make this sound good.
You're doing a great job, Steve. Okay, yes, indeed, and the several states. I mean, I make that argument frequently. But in terms of the drug dealers, I think it's a pretty interesting analogy, and it happens at the state level too. I mean, the folks at the state level are taking these free drugs, and they're doing it to make themselves feel good and to make the illusion of it feeling good for their people until it all blows up. But they'll be long gone by then, living on their luxury pensions. The same thing is true at the central government, except the money's borrowed and printed. They're basically robbing us. As I put it, the federal government, since the beginning of the 20th century, has effectively been empowered to steal from the citizens in order to bribe the states to oppress those same citizens. And that's a horrible arrangement. And as I say, the crack dealers at the center are basically living on borrowed time and borrowed money too, but they're just doing it on a bigger scale, just like the whole federal government's on a bigger scale than Ponzi.
Yeah, that's a good point, Mike. And I want to get back to what the 10th Amendment Center is working on and some of those things. I'll ask you this now before we get to the end of the segment in case my button adjusting interrupts my train of thought and I don't get to. Just let people know right for a quick moment how they can reach out to you guys, where they can contact you legislatively or even just to be part of your process and help you guys out.
Everything you need to know about the 10th Amendment Center you can find at 10thamendmentcenter.com, and you just spell it all out, TENTH, amendmentcenter.com. And if you click on read, you'll find great articles and information, bill analysis, a lot of bill analysis right now. That's pretty much all we're doing. And if you click the action tab, that's the best part. You can actually look at these different issues, Obamacare, NDAA, Second Amendment, all of these type of issues. You can click on it. You'll see a map. You can actually click on New Hampshire and see what bills are there and how that you can get involved in the process of getting those bills passed in your state. So we've got some really good action centers to get people engaged, and that's probably the most exciting part of what we're doing right now.
Okay, we got a couple minutes left, about 4 minutes. What would you like our listeners to know about more than anything?
Well, I think the thing that I would like people to know about more than anything is that you can make a difference at your state level. I think a lot of us have had this experience of calling Congress. You call them up and you get some intern on the phone, and half the time they're rude to you, especially if they find out that you're calling to disagree with their boss's position on something. And they might make a little check mark, and if you're really, really lucky, you'll get a form mail in the letter a few weeks later that tell you, thanks for calling. We considered what you said, which is a bunch of BS. It works a lot differently at the state level. I talked to a state representative here in Kentucky a while back, and he told me that he has actually gone through entire legislative sessions and never heard from a constituent on any issue. That boggles my mind. So when they get 50 or 60 phone calls on a given issue, all of a sudden that has a tremendous impact on their thinking. And we have seen action alerts, getting these phone calls out, getting people to send these emails. We've seen bills that were held up in state committees get sprung out. We've seen votes get changed because these guys are much more sensitive to public pressure than your congressman. Heck, you can't even find your congressman most of the time. But like my state senator, I babysat her kids when they were little, so I know her personally. I think there's a lot closer connection between the people and their state representatives, and there's a lot more opportunity to make a change and to have an impact. And especially up there in New Hampshire, where you guys got such a big legislature, and each individual represents a relatively small sea of people. You can really impact those guys. So I really encourage people to go to that action page that I'm talking about. It's at the top of our website. You see action, and click on that, and go and look at the different issues and see the bills in New Hampshire. There's bills on almost everything. Y'all are awesome up there in New Hampshire. We've got a bill that is looking to get New Hampshire out of Common Core. There's HB 1362, which deals with the Second Amendment and state pushback to protect the right to keep and bear arms. I mentioned the data sharing. We've got this bill that would allow the insurers from out of state to sell insurance in New Hampshire, which would help increase competition. So there's a lot of great legislation. Several bills dealing with medical marijuana and actually decriminalization of marijuana. So go find out what these bills are, and then use the contact information and call your reps and stuff, and you will make a difference, I promise you.
We actually just had the sponsor of the health insurance no mandates bill in a segment before you. So after I post this, I'll send you a link. You can listen to that. We do. We call it a full contact sport here in New Hampshire with 400 House reps. It is, in theory, possible. The committee process, the LTL, OTP, pass or fail. Sometimes you run into roadblocks. You get into situations where people will be like, no, we're not going to change our vote. But the best part about having a legislature that's big is that you can create the ultimate goal of any process in a legislature, which is gridlock. You want to lock them down so that they can't make it worse.
Right. Yeah, people complain about gridlock. Oh, we got gridlock. We've got to get Congress to get along. I don't want Congress to get along. I want them to not do anything. This is a good thing. The government shutdown's, I think, one of the best things that, other than the political theater of, not letting people drive up the road to see Mount Rushmore. I think when the government's not doing anything, that's probably when we're at our safest as citizens.
Well, I agree with you, because so many laws have been passed on so many different subjects. We are hemmed in by the iron bars of government law, whether the legislators think that they're just solving stuff or not. It just takes away our ability to solve our own problems. And, gosh, we're going to have you back on again, because we're just about out of time. There's lots more to talk about here.
Well, I really appreciate you guys having me. This is one of the most fun radio segments I've ever done. I feel like I'm in a philosophy forum or something. You guys are great with the level of thought that you guys have put into this stuff. So I've really enjoyed it.
We're full-time bloggers. We put up a couple thousand posts a year, and one of our listeners told us our program feels like a brainstorming in an old colonial tavern with a roaring fireplace in the corner. So that really is kind of what it is. We get together, we talk with our guests. Sometimes we talk more than our guests, but that's what GrokTALK is, and we're very happy to have you here with us today, and we definitely want to have you back.
Well, I need to get to New Hampshire. We could hang out. That'd be cool.
Yeah, we could find an actual tavern.
That would be totally awesome.
All right, Michael Mahari from the 10th Amendment Center, comfortably in a warmer place in Kentucky. Is it warmer today?
Not that much warmer.
Well,
it
not
is
that
today,
much.
But we've been bitter, awful cold too. So.
It has. All right. Well, thank you very much for being on the program, and we hope to talk to you soon. All right, that was it for the program for today. I'd like to thank everybody who came on. Susan Olson certainly for coming in and helping lift the IQ of our program, which was always somewhat necessary from one perspective or another. He's telling me to push some buttons. All right, I'm done pushing buttons. I'm Steve McDonald with Skip Murphy, Susan, and Olson, and we are out of here. We'll see you next week.
Grok TV.